Time flies. Detective Williams joked to Oliver, "I've wanted to kill you for the last 3 years. Has it been 3 years? 3 years ago, I started making these Only Murders in the Building video podcasts. I'm pretty sure it was only me and Becca. We were the only ones doing it in season 1. Well, maybe Matt and Jess. 3 years ago. Wow. Man, it just feels so long ago that we were down looking at things in the incinerator. 3 years ago. Wow, that's so long ago. It's hard to remember there was a cute dog involved in the investigation. 3 years ago, someone appearing to help the podcast trio while also threatening them. 3 years ago, somebody who lived in the Arconia was getting a warning, "I'm watching you." The more things change, the more things stay the same. Let's solve Only Murders in the Building, Season 4, Episode 6, Blow Up. A documentary film is made by the Brothers Sisters. We'll be breaking down each episode for clues, suspects, and red herrings on the hunt to learn who shot Sazz. Spoilers for all these episodes of Only Murders in the Building. If you haven't seen up to Season 4, Episode 6, pause this video. Enjoy the Brothers Sisters' new NC-17 film in the privacy of the production office, and then come back and watch. Use the timestamps below to jump to the topic or suspect that you want to hear, and skip past stuff you don't want to hear. One thing I realize about this podcast is that each week I try to have a new tinfoil hat theory because it's fun to discuss new things. But then the following week, I don't go back and review to see if the previous tinfoil theory still holds up. Instead, each video I'm trying to present something new and interesting. But hey, since we're past the halfway point, I thought we could review all the theories I've talked about and see which of these theories still hold up, if any. Now, after the first episode, the show presented the aftermath of Sazz's death in a way that, in my opinion, it didn't seem to add up. So I naturally wondered, did Sazz fake her own death? Okay, after 6 episodes, does that still seem plausible? Well, this one's hard to believe it still could be true. I mean, they're bringing remains. If this is from the FBI and the police, you would imagine these are remains. But how likely is it that 2 people end up in the incinerator with the same type of replacement joints? I don't know if we can still believe it, but there's something there. What do you think? Is there still a way this mystery could have Sazz faking her death? Let me know down in the comments. After episode 2, I talked about a bunch of things. The first thing I talked about was, is Sazz the mysterious person who is at the Dudenoff apartment? To me, that still seems likely. The other theories I talked about were the backwards 3 theory and the infamous Howard handwriting theory. The problem with both of those theories is that they're more like big picture, final season type theories, and they don't really delve too much into Sazz's death. So, while I think they could still be true, I'm not sure they pay off this season. After episode 3, we continued on the Sazz being the Dudenoff person and saying, could Sazz be the pigtailed person in the Dudenoff photo? To me, that still feels right, but we will see. We also talked about an Abe Lincoln theory, with an actor being the killer. There really doesn't feel like a good actor who could be the killer. What do you guys think? Again, let's talk in the comments. Let's figure this out. After episode 4, we had the tinfoil hat Loretta theory, which seemed far-fetched then, really still seems very far-fetched, but there's enough circumstantial clues that kind of make it seem correct. What do you guys think? Does anybody still suspect Loretta? We also had the Alfred Hitchcock theory, which has more to do with story structure and less to do with figuring out who the villains of this tale are. However, if the show is trying to do its own version of Rear Window, Vince Fish is the character most similar to Thorwald. After episode 5, we had the tap-in taping theory. Did this week's episode prove we were correct? Do we officially get the correct bell? I don't know. We've still got a bit of time before we can confirm it was taping. I also suspected that the person shot was Stunt Man Glen. To me, that made the most sense, but the show led me there, so it doesn't feel like I solved any giant mystery. Let's hear your thoughts now. What theories have we been talking about through these 6 weeks, 6 episodes, that really still feels like it could point us to the killer or killers? Where do we need to be focused? And to that end, I put up a poll on our YouTube community page asking you, hey, where do you think the killer comes from? Do they come from the Hollywood crew, the West Tower Westies, or a different figure like maybe Jan or Glenn or Dr. Mackey? With over 700 votes, currently Hollywood is in the first position. You guys think the killers come from the Hollywood crew. Did this episode change your mind? If you haven't already, please go vote. We want the Clue crew to have their say and get this poll legitimate so we can present the results to Detective Williams. Later, in this week's Tinfoil Hat Theory section, I'll talk about a theory which I'm not sure I actually agree with. Plus, at the very end, after your feedback, I'll talk about a slight, minor, barely a spoiler. It's a description about next week's episode that people online have been talking about. Let's take a look at the opening credit Easter eggs. There's a film projector on the top of the Arconia. In the closing credits, we have the twin Alices as well as the twin shoulder replacements. The episode title this week is named after the film Blow Up, a 1966 psychological mystery film. The film is set within the contemporary mod subculture of swinging London. And anytime I hear mod subculture, I have to go, we are the mods, we are the mods, we are the mods. Isn't that from Quadrophenia? It's about mods. Anyway. The film follows a fashion photographer who believes he has unwittingly captured a murder on film. Now this is a spoiler for Blow Up, but I think I do have to say it considering everything we've talked about. At the end of Blow Up, the audience is unsure if anyone was actually murdered or not. Could we be in a similar situation here on Only Murders in the Building Season 4? Right now, we're about at 8,000 subscribers, which means we're 2,000 subscribers away from our goal of 10,000. Please, if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button. Yell at me as you subscribe. After you subscribe, go down in the comments and point out all the flaws in these videos. Like, hey, in your video on episode 5, you never actually mentioned that Tawny's footprint matched the footprint in the Dudenoff apartment. I'm subscribing to tell you all the things you do wrong. Do it for me, do it for you, do it for the algorithm gods. And if you have subscribed, thank you very, very much. Before we run down the suspects, let's see what episode 6 taught us about the victim, actor, stunt double, Sazz Pataki. Man, this was a great episode, so fun, so thrilling, edge of your seat stuff. However, I'm not sure we learned too much more about Sazz. We know that Sazz told Jan there was another murder in the building. How did Sazz know about Professor Dudenoff? Now let's look at the suspects. Jan did not appear in the episode, but Jan is back in New York City. At this rate, will Jan end up being a hero, saving Charles's life and getting revenge on Sazz's killer? Clue crew member Alex has predicted that Jan will become the season 5 murder victim. What are your thoughts on Jan? Or what are your thoughts on those delicious treats from Baked by Melissa? Look at all of these locations, none especially close to the Arconia, but look at those treats. Delish. Irish stunt person Glen Stubbins. Glen was shot in a plate in his head, but he's stable. This is a comedy show, so will the bullet help Glen stop seeing imaginary rats everywhere? We should note as investigators that just because Glen was shot, that does not mean he was not involved in Sazz's murder. It could be his co-conspirator trying to take him out and cover their tracks. Vince Fish in apartment E. We find out Vince was an actor in the Brothers-Sisters student film. Professor Dudenoff thought he would be perfect for the part. This feels like a better look around Vince's room. Look at all these film posters on his wall. This one here says New York City 1997 Cinema Fest. Vince did take one of Professor Dudenoff's classes. There's some shadiness here. When the podcast trio knock on his door, he calls out real loud, "Visitors!" as if he's trying to let Rudy and maybe other people know, hey, get back to normal. We're about to see newbies. Vince's eye patch has flipped to the other side, and he claims his pink eye moved from one eye to the other. Do you guys believe him? When we met Vince, he said the windows in his apartment were painted shut, but as this episode reveals, those windows can be pried open. Rudy Thurber from apartment H. Rudy pings the camera lens. Terrible. Come on, Rudy. I work. Rudy also took one of Professor Dudenoff's classes. He claims at a different time than Vince. Rudy and Vince were out on the town that day when they went to get the drone. Did they also go up to 125th Street to cash a Social Security check? Rudy and Vince crash the drone once they hear that Dudenoff is back in New York City. Are they nervous because they know that Dudenoff is dead? Now, as ridiculous as this sounds, the Westies could still be good guys. There's a chance that Dudenoff knew he was going to die, knew that all his former students would lose their apartments from the rent control. He encouraged them to hide his death and put his body in the incinerator because he loved the Arconia so much, and that way they could keep their apartments, the rent would stay the same, etc. It's crazy, but possible. Professor Dudenoff teaches at a community college. He teaches the fundamentals of Cinema 101. This community college, which is called Sheepshead Bay, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, that's an area in South Brooklyn. Professor Dudenoff, I think, has good lessons. He teaches the students, never censor yourself, keep rolling, chaos can be art. Many of the students felt the brothers-sisters were Professor Dudenoff's favorites. Detective Williams says Professor Dudenoff was cashing a Social Security check at a bodega on 125th Street. If you're not familiar with Manhattan, that's about 2 miles north of where the Arconia is. Professor Dudenoff, or you could call him Milton if you're one of his favorites, he gave the sisters a pair of Super 8 cameras. His left shoulder replacement joint was in the incinerator, the same incinerator where Sazz was. Did the professor die 3 years ago? Who killed Professor Dudenoff? Is he faking his death? Bev Melon. Now the shot into the photo shoot area came from outside a window. Bev suddenly appears in the studio, so if she fired the shot, she got into the studio real quickly. Like many of the characters, they get over this gunshot real quickly. Bev calls everybody into the production office. She gives the crew a positive outlook, while also handing out legal contracts to avoid being sued. The Brothers Sisters. They made their first film at 9 years old, 2003's Pygmalion's Defeat, and that is the word pig in there. The opening credits that the Brothers Sisters create seems to feature silver tinsel, right? Their 2020 film in high school, The Song of the Ruptured Swan, a classic. 2 thumbs up. Their student film in college appears to be The Desecration of Alice. It's about an artist who made identical twins out of clay. Was this student film shot in the Dudenoff apartment in the West Tower? What do you think? We're told these sisters would do anything for the professor. Just like Bev, the Brothers Sisters are unperturbed. There's been a shooting, they don't care. They're calm, they're filming in the Arconia. They hid cameras all around the Arconia, in Oliver's apartment, in the penthouse production office. The night Sazz died, the Brothers Sisters were in the Arconia. One behind-the-scenes fun thing is that when they were filming on location in Manhattan, Only Murders in the Building used a different name. They said they were filming The Desecration of Alice. TDOA was on all the signs around New York when they were filming. Marshall P. Pope. Marshall just constantly looking shady in the last 2 episodes. In this episode, he knocks over a bunch of scripts while Bev is talking. In the last episode, Charles told Eugene Levy it had to be 2 people who killed Sazz. Did Marshall hear 2 P-Popes who killed Sazz? Zach Galifianakis. Stay strong, Zach. Fight. Don't give in to the light, Zach. He was shot in his fat, and he's been blackmailed and has to stay attached to the film. Loretta Durkin. When Oliver proposes to Loretta over the phone, she can't respond because she's playing a burn victim on her new hit show. In this scene, I don't see Jack Jonk. Uma is the best. She should be happy that after so many violent crimes have been committed, the Arconia is finally installing security cameras. But no, Uma will never change. She's complaining. And watch out for that drone, Uma. Howard Morris. Howard just keeps filming. Earn that paycheck, Howard. Howard even has a collar camera on Gravy. This is neither here nor there, but go back and watch Howard's first couple of appearances in season 1. Remember when he got interviewed, the bitter, angry man who comically hated Tim Kono? Where is that character? He's been replaced by a jovial goof Howard. We love you, Howard. Oliver Putnam. There are so many hidden cameras in Oliver's apartment. RL, you assume living room, has at least 6. The good news, Oliver must be feeling a bit better. While they watch the Brothers Sisters student film, Oliver has got his dips. Now here's where I get into what is the killer's motivation. The killer did replace Charles's window because they broke it or because they wanted Sazz's murder not to be discovered. Here, you assume the killer sent Oliver a promo code for a free rug pad right after the remains are spilled on the rug. Why are these killers so nice? Do the two killers have two different personalities? One nice one who sends a promo code when your rug gets destroyed, and one who threatens and is evil. Charles Hayden Savage. Charles is worried that their podcast is what got Sazz killed. Let's go big picture to you. I want to hear your feedback. Do you think that will be true? I personally don't. Would the show place the blame on a podcast for a murder? I just don't think so, but what do you think? Mabel Mora. My main note about Mabel is that her story this season is a bit smaller. Charles is dealing with the grief of losing Sazz, his good friend. The season-long story for Oliver is his long-distance relationship with Loretta. Mabel's, it feels like it's very slight. What is she going to do now? What is her career? What do you want her career to be? I think this is better than having her go through yet another romance, but what do you guys feel about Mabel's season-long arc? For this week's tinfoil hat theory, we're going to talk about a theory which I think really is perfect in every way except the beginning. But who cares what I think? We want to know what the Clue Crew thinks, and so many of you guys have written a version of this theory in the comments that I feel like we have to talk about it. This is called the stolen script theory. The way this theory works is that Sazz wrote a screenplay about only murders in the building. We can tell that Sazz wrote the script because Charles is presented lovingly. He's like the hero, where the others, like Oliver, are kind of bumbling. Writer Marshall, who is so desperate to get a screenplay out there, he steals Sazz's script and presents it as his own. Sazz finds out about this theft, and so she calls Bev and says, hey, there's a problem about this script with your movie that you're making, because it's my idea that's been stolen. So Marshall has to kill her so that the truth doesn't come out. The show has demonstrated that Marshall really isn't that great of a writer. The rewrites that Marshall did, which Zach Galifianakis pointed out at the end of episode 5, they're really awkward and ham-fisted. Insecure Oliver was very insecure. That writing is not exactly perfect. Marshall has really good vision, better than 2020. He can see well in the distance, which might be good if you were going to fire a sniper rifle, where some characters like Bev, we keep seeing Bev needing readers to look at things, so her eyesight is not perfect. So that's the gist of the theory. There are lots of little tangents within it. But let me say, that is a logical theory. It makes sense. It kind of works with the story that's been presented. Why would I question it? Well, my main problem with it is that the show has not shown us in any way that Sazz wrote a script. We saw Zazz's apartment in Hollywood. There weren't any signs or clues there on her desk that she was writing a script. Now, you could say there are scripts on Sazz's desk, but that doesn't really mean that she wanted to write or that she had written. I mean, there's computer stuff on my desk. It doesn't mean I want to work in IT. Instead, we find out stories that Sazz wanted to retire. Sazz wanted to open a school for stunt people. None of that has anything to do with writing a script. Now, having said that, we could find out in these final episodes, oh yeah, Sazz wanted to write a script or Sazz wrote a script. So I suppose it could be true. But if it is true, I would be upset at the show for not presenting any clues earlier that Sazz was writing a script. So maybe if we could come up with something else that Sazz did about this script. So maybe Sazz didn't write it, but if we could change that element of Sazz writing a script, I do think this theory makes a lot of sense. I just got to find a way that it works for me. But again, who cares what I think? I want to know what you think. Go down in the comments. A lot of you guys have written me this theory. Do you still believe it after episode 6? If you're just hearing this for the first time, what do you think? Does it make sense to you? Now let's get to your feedback. On Twitter, our good Double L loyal listener, Link Hogthrob, who's at Matt's Test Lab 1 on Twitter, they wrote, "We haven't had a famous killer this far. Not sure why the show would do that now. The last episode definitely makes the brothers-sisters super sus." On YouTube, Boomer Angerful wrote, "Hi, blind viewer here. One thing I'd like to add is that if you turn on the audio description and watch Season 3, Episode 10, right when Sazz enters Charles's apartment, the audio description narration says, 'A figure with a hat and suit moves into the kitchen. Bang, they fall.' If you've never heard audio description before, here's a bit of the audio description from when Sazz was shot.
A silhouetted figure steps inside. They drop, A bullet hole pierces a window.
The audio description is literally saying what the shot on the screen is. So they show the hole in the window after Sazz has been shot. It's not necessarily that Sazz was shot and then a hole appeared in the window after she got hit. It's just that's what the shots were. That said, a lot of people have had really good theories that Sazz wasn't shot from the Dudenoff apartment. The killer was in Charles's apartment, shot Sazz, and the bullet went through Sazz and then out the window. If that theory somehow ends up to be true, that means the bullet went through Sazz, out the window, and is somewhere in the Arconia courtyard, or it's in the outside wall of the West Tower. These are fun ideas. Again, the show's got to give us a bit more for it to make any sense. Conan wrote, if Sazz called Bev, that means, number one, that Bev and Sazz are somehow acquaintances at least. Perhaps Sazz was probably going to be the stunt double for Eugene Levy. And two, since Sazz told Bev, Bev's clearly, in Sazz's eyes, not the main problem with the Hollywood bubble and the Hollywood shoot. And therefore, Bev is probably not the murderer, is what Conan says. Interesting idea. Galen wrote, wait, does Irish stunt double Glen ever recognize anybody without being cued by an introduction or hearing them speak? Could Glen have prosopagnosia? If Glen has that, he wouldn't be able to tell anyone apart by their faces. And that could be how someone could shoot Sazz thinking it's Charles, or vice versa. Vanessa wrote, if the murderer is one of the producers or writers, that will feel too similar to last season, season 3, where the killers were the producers. I hope the show makes something a bit more original in season 4. Frieza Mouse, I hope I'm pronouncing that correct, said the killer is Taubert. Just saying it's weird how he just disappeared without a trace this season. And finally, Later Tonight Show wrote, here's my tinfoil hat theory. What if Sazz bought the exact same metal joints she had in her body and tossed them down the incinerator chute with, stay with me, a pig leg, which burned in the incinerator instead of her body? Sazz owes the Westies another pig leg, a ham leg, so she mails each of them one. That's why we see Vince Fish getting one in one of the earlier episodes. Whew, I love all this feedback. You guys know what to do. Read all the feedback on the YouTube comments. Watch our social media channels for people who submit feedback, and we retweet it on @PPHQ on Twitter, Instagram, Threads, Facebook.com/PPHQ. We want to hear from you. Okay, here's the slight, minor, barely a spoiler about next week's episode 7, Valley of the Dolls. It's described as terrified by a threat inside the Arconia. The trio race out of the city. A member of Charles's family provides refuge, and yet this safe house proves to be anything but. Next week, episode 7, is the last episode the critics were sent before the season began. And in that, we know that we're going to meet Melissa McCarthy playing Charles's sister, Doreen. Do you like Melissa McCarthy? Does she make you laugh? Let's hear your thoughts. Let's get justice for Sazz. Can't wait. Talk to you next week.